Hi there, in this video I want to share with you 5 ways that you can use to make your sound effects sound bigger and larger. And what I'm talking about when I say that is not just that it sounds louder. So if you imagine like a baby that's crying 100 meters away compared to if it's crying like right up in your face, it's still the same size baby. What I'm talking about is what if you had like a giant baby that was crying right in front of you? So what could we do to make that sound bigger and larger? All right, so here we are inside of Reaper, and naturally the first thing that we're gonna wanna do to make something sound and feel larger is gonna be to pitch shift it. So here I have a little voice clip. All right, let's get started. Sounds very natural, but it doesn't sound like it's any bigger. And the first thing that you're gonna wanna do is, of course, just load any kind of pitch shifter. You can pitch shift down an octave, so I'm just gonna go down a whole octave here, 12 semitones, and now if we hear it,
All right, let's get started.
naturally, now it sounds like this big creature, right? It's definitely larger and it works. But the issue is that it completely changes the quality of the original sound recording, right? If you don't want to change it that much, then pitch shifter won't really work. So what can you do? All right, so here is this gun sample sound that I designed. And so let's just have a listen to it. Right, sounds good. Now, if I wanted to make it bigger, let's say, and we were going to use the same technique as we used before and just add a pitch shifter, but bring it down, let's say 12. Right, it's not really the same kind of weapon anymore. So we could do that and it could work. But another thing that I personally like to do is there's a few techniques here that I like to do. One is you can add something like a disperser here plugin, which is just gonna add some bass boost to your sound. Right, it just adds it. It's very subtle, but it helps. But one of the techniques I do like to do is to add a little like transient shaper to attack and punch out the bass just as it comes in, just right at the beginning. So if we listen before, right, that completely changes the size of the weapon. It makes it feel a lot bigger and heavier. Now, another way that you could accomplish a similar technique here, I'm just going to take off this multi-pass where I'm adding the transient in the bass section. And you could do something similar just by adding something like, let's say, an EQ pass here. And if I have this LFO here, this is what is being triggered right at the beginning. It's going really fast here. So what I can do is I can assign this LFO here to the lows. And you can have a kind of a similar effect. Now here you have to be really careful because it's really easy to overdo the bass and then you just basically muddy up your sound too much. Right, as you can see here, it's just really, I mean, I guess depending on the style or what you're going for, that could be it. But I like to keep it a bit more subtle here. And again, I'm really keeping it at the transit so it doesn't last throughout the entire sound. And it's just really punching right at the beginning. It just helps to make it feel a lot bigger. And then we can still get the end, the kind of the tail, if you will, of the sound. It's still present. It still makes sense. Now, this technique actually only works if you have some sort of low end information present in the low end to be able to boost it and to be able to make it punch out a little bit more. But what if you don't have any kind of low end information? So let's have a look at another example here that I have. All right, so here we have a mechanical footstep that I designed. Let's have a listen. All right, so if we look at the EQ here, we can see if there's any low-end information. And here we can see there is low-end information, but even if I take it off, let's say like this, you can see there's barely anything in the low end anymore. Now what we can do is we can add some harmonic low end enhancers. So there's 2 of these that I really like to go to. One is Enforcer by Boom Library. And basically what this is doing, it's basically like a synthesizer, and it's just gonna add some low end to your sound. And it's gonna be triggered based on the threshold that I've set up here. And so this is just gonna add a thump. So if we listen to it here, that's what it's adding. So it's gonna add that low end back into the signal. So now if we have a listen, sounds okay. The next low end enhancer that I like to add here is a sub synth. And so this is just gonna add even more sub here. And you can kind of control where you want these sub to be added, whether it's between 24 to 36, 36, 56, 56 to 80. I usually do only 56 to 80. Anything lower than that is usually kind of too muddy for me. So that's what I did here. If we play it. So if we take these off with back on. And now if I just take off that low end here, that low end pass filter, and now let's have a listen to everything together. Right, it just makes everything so much bigger and weightier and heavier. So those are 2 low-end enhancers that you can add. If you don't have any kind of low-end information in your sound effect, you can add those in there. Now, if you don't have these plugins, what can you do? Well, you can actually design your own. Now, the way that you could do this, you could just simply have a patch or a layer in your sound design where you load a synth of choice. It could be like, let's say this one here. This is Faceplant, and I'm just gonna load in an analog synth here. It could just be a sine wave. right? And just a sine wave in the low end, that could be enough to add some sounds. Now, another technique that I like to use to just be creative and just kind of design some new sounds is I'll actually load a sampler. And here, I'll load in some sound effects, some sound files that I design. And these are basically long sound files that I'll play out, and I just kind of put in different plugin chains on them, different effects that I kind of stack on top of each other just to experiment and see what kind of sounds I can get. And then I can go in and just sample them. So here's one file like right here. Right, and now with this file, I can then sample it using the same techniques that I had before, right? So let's say I want to have a bit of disperser. Maybe I want to add something like subsynth here. That could be something that I could sample out and then layer in with my effects. Again, same thing, you can do it with transient heavy material. Export that, bring it back into your design, and you can layer that in if you don't have one of these plugins that I just mentioned, like BX Subsynth or Enforcer by Boom Library. All right, finally, another way that you can make your sounds feel larger and bigger is by recording materials that are that have a lot of low-end information in them. So one way that I do this is using my Loam Geophone. This is a microphone that basically captures low-end information up to only 1,000 hertz. So it's really a very small range, but it just captures that low-end information really well. So if you're designing and recording your own sounds, this could be a really good way to do it. So here I have a little example here. This is me opening and closing, I think it was a cabinet. So if we have a listen here. Right, so just with that, I could layer it in with either my original recording, or I can just chop these up here just like that, and then I can use that as a layer in my design. If, like, again, let's say I'm doing some sort of impact sound. Now, just as a bonus tip here, a plugin here that I didn't mention, but I do use this quite a lot, and this is Uber Loud, and this works really well for their low end because you're boosting and you're compressing, and you're I think you're also, they have a bit of saturation in here, but you're basically compressing the low end. So if I take this off here, let me just show you what it sounds like really quickly if you haven't used this before, but if you have a listen here, right? And if we just really push it. Now, again, you have to be really careful not to overuse it, unless, of course, that's kind of what you're going for, because it can be too much, but it can really add a lot of low end. All right, and you can make your sounds just feel a lot bigger, huge, and really powerful that way. All right, so I hope you found that useful and valuable. These are all different ways and techniques that I have used to make my sounds feel bigger and just heavier and just boosting the low end. So don't limit yourself to these techniques. Of course, there's other ways to do it, and the most powerful way to do it is actually to use them in combination, which is basically what I do all the time. I rarely just use one or two plugins or one or two of these techniques that I showed. Usually I do multiple things, multiple steps, multiple plugins to try to boost and make the sound feel bigger, whether it's pitch shifting alongside of something like Enforcer or BX Subsynth, or just adding another layer that is just focused on the low end, like adding a kick or a designed sub layer, right? So yeah, just experiment with that. I hope you found this useful and valuable. And if you have any comments, questions, leave them down below. That's it for now. Thanks so much for watching all the way through to the end. See you in the next video. Bye.